failure took out your bank, or all the banks for that matter, are your banking records safe in your hands? So when they get things fixed and repaired, you can say, hey, look, this is what I had. You have it. I want it back. Is your personal data safe? Family records, addresses, phone numbers? Well, squeeze on over to freedomslips.com. Yes, that's www.freedomslips.com. Click the banner on the homepage for the EMP-proof bullet drive. Full scoop of everything that we offer. So, folks, keep your data safe for your peace of mind. Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com. You don't need to expect us. We're already here.
It is the people's war. It is our war. We are the fighters. Fight it then. Fight it with all that is in us. And may God defend the right.
Warning! Warning!
We gotta stop them! They're gonna kill us all!
See how the trouble you've started?
Be they the government, be they industry, be they organized labor, be they anyone, or human beings. Time when the operation of the machine becomes so odious, makes you so sick at heart that you can't take part. You can't even passively take part. And you've got to put your bodies upon the gears and upon the wheels, upon the levers, upon all the apparatus, and you've got to make it stop. And you've got to indicate to the people who run it, to the people who own it, that unless you're free, the machine will be prevented from working at all.
Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com, the #1 listener-supported talk radio station, throwing ourselves upon the gears of the machine. Revolution Radio, where information never sleeps.
You called down the thunder, well now you got it.
Right, you tell them I'm coming, and hell's coming with me, you hear? Hell's coming with me!
Revolution Radio. All right, thanks for listening while we took that short break here at Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com. And now we're going to get back to your host.
Welcome to Celebrate Truth Radio. I'm your host, Robbie Davidson. This is episode 98. It is February 13th, 2021. I guess the news today is the big acquittal happened. What a joke. What a joke is going on there, trying to impeach someone that is not even president. They are so desperate. They're so crazy. This is what we're seeing in the world, where everyone, especially the left, the cancel culture, it's going to the extreme. They're having tantrums. I'm sure they're going to have a fit. The fact that they weren't able to impeach President Donald J. Trump, or former President Donald J. Trump, I should say. But it's just unbelievable. All the news, again, could have seen that one coming. They needed 67 votes, I believe, and they got 40 some. It didn't pass. A lot of that stuff was just to show they hate Trump. They want to disgrace him. They're going to be coming after him relentlessly, continually. I've been saying this on many broadcasts. A lot of people have been saying, you don't understand. Trump is all part of the New World Order. Guys, I'm just telling you right now, it's done. If that's the case and his job is already accomplished, why are they going to be going after him and his family viciously? So just keep that in mind as you watch over the next few years, as they will not let up, continually trying to attack him legally, financially, any which way, not just Trump, but his entire family. They're going to be coming after. They want to make an example of him. They're incredibly angry of everything that took place. And who knows why and how it all went down. But the reality is, this is what we're dealing with. In the last show, I went in explaining the Great Reset and what they're doing, getting closer to pulling off their agenda. And tonight, speaking of the acquittal and the joke there's a lot of craziness that's going on, in my country, in many countries around the world, but specifically things are heating up here in Canada. We're going to be getting into pastor arrested in Canada, and it is just starting. If you think that is the beginning of the story, I'm going to get you up to date. And what makes this so interesting, and I guess so close to home for me, is this is my former pastor. We went to the church for about 4 years. The whole family, incredible congregation, fellowship. The church got to know Pastor James Coates very, very well, and 100% in support of what he is doing. And coming under the scrutiny, the media, And while he is not doing any media interviews, he doesn't want to be spotlighted. He did just do a show with another Christian podcast where they did an interview for about an hour, which you're going to be hearing tonight. I'm going to be playing that for the show when we get into the story, because I think it's a fantastic interview explaining the stance and where they're at. Now, I've explained to many people as far as the church, GraceLife Church, here in my home city. It is right now the only church in my city that is taking this stand. It is now spilling over not just with the leadership, but also into the people that attend that church. They tried to shield that, but now it is moving into people being attacked that are simply going there. They're documenting it. They're following them. They're trying to get them fired from church, fired from their occupation, their jobs. It's getting pretty intense right now. And again, it's just starting out because Pastor James Coates is not going to be backing down. Now, the title is he was arrested. Now, technically speaking, this happened last Sunday. It was after the service concluded, and they arrested him afterwards. It was more of a formality. They almost had to do it. It's not like he got handcuffed, but they, officially arrested him. They still let him go with conditions saying, hey, this is what you need to do. You need to shut down the church. You need to do this, this, this. Well, he's not going to be doing that. So come tomorrow, Sunday, I think the police, the AHS, which is the Alberta Health Services, they will be there because they're the ones that are conducting it. They're seriously in a legal battle right now. They already went to court once, and Pastor James Coates lost that one. And he was in breach, so that's why they went in and arrested him, I guess, formally. But you're going to hear exactly, what took place, what happened. I'm going to play a couple clips, and this happened before the arrest. So this was the media at the church, just documenting that this church will not stop what they're doing. And it's interesting, the church is actually growing in numbers. No surprise there. People are seeing that he's taking not just a stand, but even, the sermon that I'd mirrored on my channel, youtube.com/celebrate truth. For those that are listening on the radio, check it out at the YouTube channel. I have a sermon there. I also link to it in the description for the people that are listening tonight on YouTube. The entire sermon is there, but that sermon itself was phenomenal. I have shared it with so many people. I want people to seriously take all of that in prayerfully and consider what is presented, because he goes through biblical, legal, he goes through other different argumentation on saying, look, this is where the situation is. And ultimately, who is in charge of the church? Is it the government? Or is it Christ? Is it Jesus, right? And that's the position that they're taking. They're saying the head of the church is Jesus. We must obey him. We must obey God. When it comes to this, we cannot stop assembling and specifically stop worshiping. They were told specifically that they're not even allowed to sing. Can you imagine? You're not allowed to sing. And here's where it gets crazy. Even if you're masked, you're not allowed to sing. Not that this church is doing any type of mandate. I would say the majority of people aren't wearing masks, but they leave it open. If you feel comfortable, you want to wear a mask, so be it. But they're not enforcing it. They're not mandating it. And yet, they were also told that, singing is prohibited. So this is something that, churches around the world need to listen to things like this and saying, how far is too far? At what point do you sit there and say, look, we can play ball here until a certain point. And I think that certain point is being reached, not just with GraceLife Church here in Edmonton, but also other churches that are starting to see, wait a minute, this is, 10 months in now, specifically here in my city, and enough's enough. And, if more people kind of stand up, then I think things will change. So without further ado, we'll get into that here in just a second. I just want to say hello to a lot of people that are joining, especially on YouTube. Good to see Patricia Steer in the house. Hey, Frank. Hey, there's just so many people here. Adam, great to see everyone that's joining in. Thank you to the wonderful mods that are helping to moderate the channel and keep everything great moving along. We have a 24/7 live stream that takes place on Celebrate Truth at YouTube. Check that out. That airs when I'm not doing my live radio shows, and you can check that out. So really appreciate all you guys joining here on a Saturday night, February the 13th, 2021. We're not even 2 months into 2021, and it's turning out to be pretty insane. If you thought 2020 was crazy, get ready for 2021, because things are just heating up, in my opinion. They're moving towards the Great Reset and a lot of agendas that are in place. But there always is the light at the end of the tunnel. There always is that silver lining. And that's something that, you need to look at, not hopeful or wishful thinking, but quite honestly, in the whole scheme of things, there's a lot of things that are taking place that we don't have to look at it as all negative. But that's something that I think is important. So let's get over right to the news here. And I'm going to play a short clip and we'll read through a couple news articles. These ones just came out last week. This clip is done right before he gets not right before, it was right before church started. And like I mentioned, and you'll hear in the interview tonight, that Pastor James Coates gets arrested at the end of the service. Now, to be fair, I think it's important to say that he goes on the record saying that they were very reasonable, that it wasn't, they waited until service was done. They did it kind of quietly. So it wasn't like they were trying to make a scene. They did it respectfully. They didn't disrupt the service. And quite honestly, even in the service, they even had said to even the law and also the Alberta Health, just the authorities and the officials, that they, respect them. But there's times when they have to basically resist and say, sorry, we cannot do that. We need to honor and obey God. So here we go. Let's go over to, I believe this is Global News.
Alberta Health Services issued a public health order Friday to close GraceLife Church, but today the parking lot full of churchgoers attending morning services. Alberta Health Services was on site to deliver the order with the assistance of RCMP. People could be seen entering the church without masks and not social distancing. Global News attempted to approach the church building to get comment, but were told to leave the property and that no one would be commenting. The church has been under fire for not following public health restrictions. In December, the church was ordered to submit a relaunch plan outlining its safe prevention measures, but no plan was submitted. Earlier this month, Alberta Health Service officials inspected the church. They found nearly 300 people attended a service, exceeding the building's 15% fire code occupancy limit. They also found church members, staff, and volunteers not wearing masks. Pastor James Coates was issued a $1,200 ticket under the Public Health Act. A notice on the church's website and on the front door of the building says the facility is open to GraceLife members only in accordance with health guidelines and not the general public.
I got sound here. So yeah, I guess it's, if I click on over there, there's no sound. So sorry, I guess I had the setting wrong on there. So if I'm over on a page like that, then I won't be able to talk on it. So that's very strange. Let's see here. Huh. All right. Well, this is interesting. Good thing we got video, so you don't have to listen to me much. So good to know. I appreciate everyone telling me that there's no sound when I'm flipping over to the actual article itself. So I guess we will have to bypass that. So let's get right into the interview so we can do that. I will figure out the audio issues when we're clicking over. So we should be good with sound. Good. Glad. Everyone's saying that you can hear me. So that's good to go. So so what I was saying, just when I was going through that, I said last month the RCMP said its role was to observe and ensure a peaceful interaction between AHS and the lead agency on the case. So this is kind of what they were talking about. And then after defying Alberta's COVID-19 rules, Alberta Health Services orders for several weeks in a row, the pastor of a Christian church on the outskirts of Edmonton was arrested by RCMP after this past Sunday service. GraceLife Church is located just about 5 minutes outside of Edmonton, my city here. RCMP have monitored the Sunday morning activity of the church for several weekends in a row after AHS issued a work order on December 17th, 2020, which was escalated to a closure order at the end of January. They said the parking lot was full, no one was hardly wearing masks, and they were in violation of the 15% total capacity rule. And then it just ended up talking about a bunch of that. So getting into the different articles, the Toronto Star came out with one, said Alberta pastor charged, Sunday church services violated COVID-19 rules. The pastor of an Edmonton area church that had been holding Sunday services with as many as 300 people has been charged with violating COVID-19 health rules. RCMP says James Coates of GraceLife Church is charged with violating one count of the Public Health Act and is to appear in Stony Plain Provincial Court on March 31st. The church on Edmonton's western edge has been clashing with health authorities for 2 months over COVID-19 rules and has previously ignored an order to close down. Faith-based services are currently limited to 15% capacity, and congregants must observe mask and distancing rules. In the preceding 2 weeks, the church has held services with 290 to 300 congregants, with video of the services showing no masks. Prior to the arrest, a $1,200 fine was levied in December. Mounties say that Sunday's service violated health rules with attendance double the restricted capacity. They said they didn't disrupt the service, but charged Coates after noting he was cooperative. There were many different discussions and considerations at play in relations to the GraceLife Church and their non-compliance, said RCMP Inspector Mike Locan in the news release on Monday. We have ensured that the church is well aware of the conditions that they need to follow, and they have been afforded repeated opportunities to comply. In collaboration with Alberta Health Services, we have now followed up with the escalated enforcement. They're getting the police and the law involved. GraceLife Church officials and Coates could not be reached for comment, but on Sunday, the church posted on its website a 1,600-word statement explaining that it does not believe the spread of the virus is a critical public health threat and that the government is using the pandemic to undermine civil rights and freedoms. Love for our neighbor demands that we exercise our civil liberties, reads the statement. Churches should open, businesses should open, families and friends should come together around meals, and people should begin to exercise their civil liberties again. Otherwise, we may not get them back. The letter also notes that the church is following the word of Premier Jason Kenney, who said previously has downplayed the seriousness of the virus and linked it to influenza. All right, so I want to read this too. I want to go to Church Life. So the website, if you guys are interested and you want to read this at a later date, is just GraceLife, all one word, .ca. So if you go to gracelife.ca, I believe it's gracelife.ca. Yep, there it is. So the public statement here, it reads as follows. It says, "Dear fellow Albertans," this is what pops up right when you go to the screen. It goes without saying that this has been an incredibly difficult 11 months. The effects and ramifications of COVID-19 on our previous province are not insignificant. We sympathize with everyone who has suffered loss at this time, whether it be the loss of a loved one, a loss of something that comes from government lockdowns, such as economic loss or suffering as a result of being denied necessary health care. Given the attention our church has received in recent days, we want to address the broader public on the reasons for gathering as a local church. What follows is not theological difference. We have already addressed that sufficiently here. It is primarily and predominantly obedience to our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ that has shaped our stance. Instead, what follows will shed light in our approach to what is being called a pandemic. The reason we put pandemic in quotes is because the definition of a pandemic was changed about 10 years ago. At one time, a pandemic was defined as an infectious disease that resulted in a certain percentage of excess deaths over and above normal annual averages. The definition was changed in connection with H1N1 to remove this threshold. 10 years ago, COVID-19 would have not qualified as a pandemic. In fact, not even close. When COVID-19 first appeared, we shifted to live stream and abided by most of the new government guidelines for our gatherings. But when the first declared public health emergency ended, we opened our doors and returned to nearly normal gatherings on Sunday, June 21st, 2020. We did so recognizing COVID-19 was much less severe than the government had initially projected. The sentiment was reflected in the assessment of the Premier of Alberta, who deliberated. He referenced COVID-19 as influenza multiple times in a speech announcing the end of the first declared public health emergency. In early July, it was brought to our attention that 2 separate individuals had attended our gatherings on 2 consecutive Sundays and subsequently tested positive for the virus, both cases being unrelated to each other. At that time, we did our own internal contract tracing prior to AHS notifying us of the exposure. Many of our congregants were tested, and it was determined that no transmission of the virus had taken place. Out of the abundance of caution, we shifted exclusively to live stream and shut down all other ministries for 2 weeks, 14 days. We did this to mitigate any further spread of COVID-19. When it was evident that no further spread had taken place, we resumed our nearly normal gatherings. Since then, we have gathered as a church each Sunday without incident 28 Sundays to date. Having engaged in an immense amount of research, interacting with both doctors and frontline healthcare workers, it is apparent that the negative effects of the government lockdown measures on society far surpass the effects of COVID-19. The science being used to justify the lockdown measures are both suspect and selective. In fact, there's no empirical evidence. Again, there's that word, empirical, just like scientism versus science. Where is the empirical evidence? There is no empirical evidence that lockdowns are effective in mitigating the spread of the virus. We are gravely concerned that COVID-19 is being used to fundamentally alter society, strip us of our civil liberties. By the time the so-called pandemic is over, if it is even permitted to be over, Alberta or Albertans will be utterly reliant on government instead of free, prosperous, and independent. As such, we believe love for our neighbor demands that we exercise our civil liberties. We do not see our actions as perpetuating the longevity of COVID-19 or any other virus that will inevitably come along. If anything, we see as our actions as contributing to its end, the end of destructive lockdowns and the end of the attempt to institutionalize the deliberating fear of viral infections. Our local church is clear evidence that government lockdowns are unnecessary. In fact, it is also evident of how harmful they are. Without going into detail, we recently lost the life of one of our precious congregants who was denied necessary health care due to government lockdown measures. Considering the following statistics, it is alleged that 125,000 Albertans have tested positive for the virus. That works out to just less than 3% of the population. However, it needs to be pointed out that the PCR test being used to test for COVID-19 is fraught with false positives. This is especially true since, at least until recently, Alberta was running the PCR test at 40 amplifications. As such, the number of Albertans who have actually contracted the virus is likely significantly less. It is also vital to highlight that more than 99% of those who contract the virus will fully recover. Alberta is currently reporting 1,660 COVID-related deaths. It is critically important to articulate in this way. There's a big difference between dying from COVID and dying with COVID, but it is also crucial and critical to note that these COVID-related deaths, as tragic as they are, have not resulted in any statistical significant increase in excess deaths, and the average age of those who have died related to COVID-19 is 82, consistent with life expectancy in Alberta. Sadly, most of the individuals would have likely died due to other various lethal comorbidities, and immensely grieves us, in many cases, they were forced to die apart from their family unnecessarily. In addition, experts estimate that deaths in the long run resulting from government lockdown measures will surpass COVID-related deaths. 10 to 1. Premature deaths resulting from not getting necessary care. Suicides, drug overdoses, addictions, the development of chronic health conditions, total loss of income, family breakdowns, etc. In fact, it would seem that COVID-related deaths are being treated as though they are somehow more tragic than that of all other deaths. Many Americans are afraid and are convinced of the efficacy of the government lockdowns for two reasons: misinformation and fear-mongering. The media has so pounded the COVID-19 drum since the pandemic began, almost exclusively emphasizing caseload and deaths, that people are fearful. So fearful, in fact, that they have convinced that yielding up their civil liberties to the government is in their best interest. It is difficult to not have lost confidence in the mainstream media. It would seem as though journalism is on life support in our province. The media should be made up of the most thorough, discerning, and investigative people in our society. Instead, many of them seem to be serving the ideological agenda. Now more than ever, it is vital that Albertans exercise discernment when listening to the mainstream media. What do we believe people should do? We believe they should responsibly return to their lives. Churches should open. Businesses should open. Family and friends should come together around meals. People should begin to exercise their civil liberties again. Otherwise, we may not get them back. In fact, some say we are on the cusp of reaching a point of no return. Protect the vulnerable, exercise reasonable precautions, but begin to live our lives again. That said, living life comes with risks. Every time we get behind the wheel of a car, we are assuming the degree of risk. We accept the risk due to the benefits of driving. Yes, though vastly overblown, there are associated risks with COVID-19, as there are with other infections. Human life, though precious, is fragile. As such, death looms over all of us. That is why we need a message of hope, one that addresses the greatest need. That message is found in Jesus Christ. It is found in him because all of us have sinned and fallen short of God's perfect standard of righteousness, Romans 2:23. To sin is to violate the holiness and righteousness of God. As our Creator, he is the one who will judge us according to our deeds, and no one will stand on their own merit in that judgment. Therefore, we need a substitute, one who has both lived life and could not have died the death we deserve. Praise be to God that there is. God the Father commissioned his Son into the world to take upon himself human flesh, John 1:14, being true God and true man, whereof he lived under the law of God, Galatians 4:4, fulfilled in every respect, was tempted in all things as we are, and yet without sin, Hebrews 4:15. Then in obedience to the Father, he went to the cross, drank the full cup of the Father's wrath for the sin of all of us that believe on his name, died and rose again. In this way, he proved he had conquered both sin and death, our two greatest enemies. He has ascended into heaven and is now seated at the right hand of the Father, Colossians 3:1, awaiting the time of his second coming. In the meantime, the message of salvation is to be proclaimed to all people, Matthew 28:18-20. In fact, the church exists to proclaim this message, that if you would turn from your sin and believe on the Lord Jesus Christ, putting full trust in his finished work on the cross, along with his resurrection from the dead, you will be saved. Not only will all your sins be forgiven, but you will also be credited with a perfect record of righteousness, the very righteousness of Christ, 2 Corinthians 5:21. And so we would urge you to be reconciled to God through his Son this day, the very one who has given you life and breath. Should you do so, you will receive eternal life and experience life after death, John 11:25. Death looms over all of us, but there is a message of concrete hope in the gospel of the Lord Jesus Christ. So that was the statement that was put up on the church at gracelife.ca for the media, for the whole world, as this thing blows up in my city, as more people catch on to this news. It's on, the networks now, and it is just starting to heat up. Like I said before, this is just the start. This is literally just the start of what is about to take place. We're going to see a lot of things transpire. And we will get right into the interview that he had just done with, let's see here, let's find it here. And I will remember that I can't talk while we're watching it, so it's a good thing because we will just listen to it. But it was on Water Break with the Water Boy with Pastor James Coates. And the YouTube channel is called Cross Politic. And that is where the interview is. And this is the only interview that I know of that he has done. And like I mentioned, for people that are just joining the show right now, this is my old pastor. We went to the church for 4 years, and really, really phenomenal. You're going to find that he's very sound-minded. He's not over the top, emotional, and he delivers just an incredible expositorial type preaching, but also delivering it in such a way that you understand. And quite honestly, even bringing up the facts of where the numbers are, but also of the agenda that they're planning to put in place as far as the Great Reset, Agenda 2030, these type of things he is aware of, which is really refreshing for sure, that someone is definitely awake in these areas. And in my city, this is the only church that is fully taking a stand. So let's get into it here. Here we go.
Hey, y'all. Thank you for tuning in to Water Break with Waterboy on your Thursday afternoon, evening, wherever you're at around the world. It's 5 o'clock somewhere. I am excited for my guest today. Pastor James Coates is joining me. If you guys know a little bit about my story, I got arrested back in September for singing psalms in the public square. And, my case got dismissed. We won our case back on January 9th, but I don't think this is the same, going to be the same case for Pastor James and what's going on with his church, because Alberta and Canada is just far more insistent on making sure that the church doesn't worship in Canada. Let me introduce Pastor James Coates. Was born and raised in Toronto area. He attended Western University in London, Ontario. He completed his undergraduate degree in kinesiology. So you know a little bit about the physical body and the spiritual body. And
I forgot most physical stuff, but yeah.
That's right. It was in the fall following his graduation where you heard the gospel. Wow, you became a Christian and you were brought into new life. James, after that, I guess years later or wherever, James attended the Master's Seminary from the fall of 2007 to the spring of 2010, where he completed his Master's of Divinity, and since then he's completed his Doctor of Ministry in expository preaching at Master's Seminary. James pastors GraceLife Church and is married to Erin, and they have 2 boys. Brother James, thanks for coming on the show, man.
Thanks for having me.
So you, Alberta or Canada has been in some form of lockdown. Alberta's been in some form of lockdown since this crisis started. Maybe give us a little background, a little context for when did the lockdown start? When did all this, and then we'll talk about kind of your evolution of thinking as we get into this.
Yeah, we like everyone, the pandemic began in March, and we went down to like 250, then down to like 100, then 50, then 15, as I recall.
Okay.
And so we were running at 15 and live streaming for quite a bit, and then things began to build up again heading into the summertime. The declared public health emergency ended in the middle of June.
Okay.
And we opened up toward the end of June, which was what we called nearly normal gatherings. And I say that because, we weren't pastoring the offering plate. We weren't passing the plate for the Lord's Supper, but we were finding other ways to navigate that.
Yep. Yeah. I think when the lockdown happened for us, it happened back on March 20th. Our mayor shut down our town, and we had no coronavirus cases. Zero. Like, shut down our town, shut down our businesses, no coronavirus cases. Our governor shut it down on March 25th statewide, and it's just unbelievable. What? All right, so in June, things started opening back up. When did things re-shut down again?
They declared a second health emergency in December, beginning of December. Now, keep in mind, so we opened up in end of June. And we had a couple of cases that touched Sunday gatherings in early July. And so we live streamed for 2 Sundays just to kind of take precaution and clear that out.
Right.
And then open back up again. But when we were open from end of June and then after those 2 Sundays, we were in non-compliance with Alberta Health Services for the entire time. So we've been in non-compliance with AHS in our province since, depending on how you want to count it, since the middle of July.
Okay. And then
things heated up with another declared public health emergency. And
that's the one you referenced in December.
That's right.
So
things, and the big issue is we were getting complaints. So because we're gathering, we're getting all these complaints. Apparently we had employees of AHS living across the street from us. And so they were phoning in complaints. And as soon as the complaints roll in, AHS has to enforce. So we had AHS and our RCMP police force at our church and still do, essentially, for the last 2 months.
Wow. And then you preached this sermon on December 20th. I caught it the first time it came out. But it seemed like you kind of, were coming along theologically and processing this all theologically. And then this sermon kind of was your theological manifesto on, okay, what has happened and how should the church be responding given everything that's been going on? Maybe kind of summarize that sermon real quick and why you came to the conclusion in December in all this and why you preached that sermon.
Yeah, I think obviously living the pandemic, the so-called pandemic, all the way along, you're gathering data, you're evaluating theological convictions. You're thinking differently. I mean, we've never had to think about any of these issues before. We've never had to question the corporate gathering. We've never had the government reaching this far inside the walls of our church. So when everything first hits, we reluctantly comply, but we're looking at Romans 13, we're looking at Hebrews 10, and it's pretty superficial at that point in time. And we're not dialed in on our legal system, so we don't know what's going on from that perspective. But over time, we begin to wrestle through this thing. I preach a sermon on Romans 13 titled "Putting the Government in Its Place."
Right.
And that was when I preached, a typical sermon on Romans 13. It was a passionate sermon.
Yeah.
But it addressed the reality that persecution is not the threshold that must be met for the church to practice civil disobedience. The issue is when it becomes a matter of obeying God or obeying man.
Right.
And so that was sort of bringing our church along. And then I preached on Hebrews chapter 10 and the paragraph where we have the gathering address there. And so that was kind of bringing our church along. I think when MacArthur came out with his statement on the spheres of authority, that was helpful. It was affirming what we were thinking, but it was stating it in a way that was helpfully clear for us.
Right.
And so we, plus, you're interacting with your congregants who disagree. Mm-hmm. And as they push back on the way you're handling things, it's forcing you to think through all these issues. Right. And so you're getting into the weeds on how to defend your position on the church needs to be open. Mm-hmm. So by the time December rolls around, I just kind of helpfully got to the end of John 8, and it was time to preach kind of a one-off sermon. It wasn't time to start a new chapter. And I thought, you know what? Given the heat that we've been getting with the RCMP and our gatherings, as well as AHS, it was time to address the issue head on. And so I just basically identified the questions that needed to be answered and then just began to answer them one by one. Mm-hmm. And so I would say this. I would say that in my own life, ecclesiology has definitely sharpened through this pandemic. And you would expect that, right?
Praise God.
You'd expect that.
Yeah.
Amen. When doctrine is being challenged and you're being put to the test and you're being forced to really think deeply and critically about what you believe, that's when robustness comes to our doctrinal convictions. And so that's happened in my life, to be sure. And that fueled the December 20th sermon.
Man, that's awesome. I think if one of the positive things that have come out of this is the church has gone through some fire. I think the church is getting growing in its theology, or faithful churches are, and the church is growing in how it applies the gospel to the public square. One of the reasons why we started Cross Politic 4 years ago was because we didn't believe the church was really applying the gospel to the public square well, if at all. And now God's putting us through this real test and fire and purifying, hopefully, the faithful churches and how we apply the gospel, ecclesiology, and all that stuff. So you preached this sermon on December 20th, and it's gotten about 20,000 views at this point. And is that kind of what you think has increased the scrutiny from your government on your church? Is there a connection between that sermon and why you think they've picked up the pace with you guys?
I'd like to say no. I think they would prefer to leave us alone, to be honest. It's too late now because it's so out in the open. But I think they knew that we weren't going to stop meeting, and I think they would have preferred to leave us alone. But the problem was they kept getting complaints because our parking lot was packed. And so they had to enforce the complaints because that's what their job is, to enforce the health orders. And so in hindsight, it's possible that sermon has fueled something because I can listen to our premier speak, and it sounds like he's listened to that sermon,
right?
And is allowing that to filter into some of his language he uses concerning us,
right?
But I would have said that they would have preferred to not have this battle, but they've been forced into it, and we haven't budged. So we're in a stare down with what we call AHS.
Right. And where do they get their authority to tell the church not to worship? Where are they getting? Do they have? In their own constitution, in your own documents, do they have authority to do what they're doing?
That's a great question, and that hasn't been put to the test yet. We have a Charter of Rights and Freedoms, and that's not as sound a document as your Constitution. Your Constitution is a far better document.
It's not really working though.
Well, yeah, no, I get that, and it's being eroded for sure as the days and weeks pass by in your country. There's no doubt, but so we have the Charter of Rights and Freedoms that gives us certain freedoms and liberties. They aren't inalienable. The whole charter begins with the I guess right for the government to infringe on certain liberties in the charter so long as they can be justified. And that's the issue. We haven't yet none of this has been taken to court to test the justifiability of it.
Right.
And with the declared public health emergency, that creates this whole new, I guess, system of government law, because you declare a health emergency that gives all this power to Alberta Health Services.
Right.
And now they have this unelected authority to enforce government edict. So
after December 20th, you guys kept going back to church, joining each other in physical bodies in the sanctuary. You're preaching every Sunday, and then they arrested you. Was it last Sunday or 2 Sundays ago?
No, this past Sunday.
So they arrested you this past Sunday after church service. So you guys had your church service. They didn't interrupt the church service, but after this church service, they arrested you and booked you. What does that mean now for where you guys are at?
Yeah, that's a great question. First of all, let me just say the RCMP officers that we interacted with, I mean, I'm sure there's going to be some that would wish they wouldn't be arresting me at all, but they did approach it in a way that was very gracious. We, in our services, when they've come in, we've given them standing ovations and honored them as our law enforcement, and so they have in turn treated us well. So they basically arrested me and released me all in the same moment while we were at church. And there were no cuffs, there was no detainment. But I was arrested, and so now I'm under what's called an undertaking, which has a condition that I not violate the Public Health Act. So there's a good possibility that if we are to host a gathering on Sunday, and I'll just say it that way at this point in time, that I will be arrested and detained following that service. It's a distinct possibility.
I appreciate, you being gracious to your officers. I believe cops are legitimate, biblical, I believe it's a biblical thing to have cops in our community. But at the same time, it's like they're arresting you for worshiping. They're arresting you for having church. At what point do cops, defend your rights versus enact and defend these unconstitutional or these, enforce these HSS mandates? It's like, at what point do they? It's just unbelievable that they're going to enforce these unelected bureaucratic, health emergency orders and not protect your God-given rights to worship. I think cops really need to kind of check themselves and what they're doing in all this. When I was arrested in my town, I met with my officers a couple weeks ago, asking them, what do you believe about the Constitution? Do you believe you swore an oath to uphold the Constitution, not these health emergency orders? Why are you enforcing those health emergency orders over? Why'd you arrest me enforcing those health emergency orders over the Constitution? And so and part of it is, we've raised a generation, or we have a generation of leaders, including our cops, who don't have a principled understanding of what their job is and what it means to protect these people's, its own citizens' liberties. Instead, they're enforcing these HSS or HHS. Is it HHS or HSS?
AHS.
AHS. They're enforcing these requirements, and it's like, come on, stop this. If the pandemic would be over, if the cops would stop enforcing it. That's really where this comes.
Well, it's amazing too, because if you think about it, like, we're at the nearly the 12-month mark. Our case numbers in Alberta are going down, and yet the enforcement's going up. I mean, we've been open for 29 Sundays.
Right.
So for 29 Sundays, we've been open, and now, potentially, the 29th Sunday and then maybe the 30th, I'm looking at arrests. I mean, that's strange.
Right.
A year into a pandemic that we have all this information, all this data, numbers are going down.
Right.
And the enforcement is going up. That's eerie.
That really is. And I'm looking at Alberta's data. You guys have had 128,000 cases and only 1,700 deaths in Alberta, with a population of about, 5 million in Alberta?
Yeah, 4.5.
How does, what does it look like? I mean, I feel like the government has kind of worked themselves up in a tizzy in all this, and they have no way to kind of back away from the direction they're going. In other words, when are they going to lift these health emergency orders?
Yeah, I don't even know. I mean, that's the whole thing. When will it end? You got new variants that are coming in. Anytime a new virus comes in, here's the new precedent for how to handle it. This is significant in terms of, I think, altering the way that society functions. And I would say we're at risk of losing civil liberties that we've enjoyed in our country since its inception.
That's right. What? So how has your church been thinking about all this? It sounds like your church is back in September, October. It sounds like you guys were kind of all having this debate, talking through the theology of what it meant for the church to be reporting to Jesus and not to the government. Where's your church at right now with you getting arrested and all that?
Yeah, our church is amazing. We have a wonderful, healthy body of believers. We've got solid men, solid women. We have been, one of the things you need in order to be able to do what we're doing is, number one, you got to have a unified leadership.
Yep.
We have a unified leadership. Without that, you can't even be open.
Right.
So we've got a unified leadership, and then once you open, you got to have a congregation that's willing to come. And our people we have had our highest attendances in our current facility in this season. We have visitors that want to come because they aren't being shepherded. They want the preaching of the Word of God. People come to our church from other churches to visit where they are complying and masking and social distancing.
Right.
And it's just like an oasis. They see a body of believers together functioning just the same way they would have a year ago. And so our church is incredibly unified. There's no question there are some that would wish that we were handling the pandemic differently. And they have handled it well. We've only lost a few families in this time, and that's regrettably, of course. We love them, but there are many, churches that would be theologically like-minded that are complying, and so we're not going to hold them back from that.
Right.
And but yeah, we have I want to say that we have a level of unity in the 90s. In terms of 90%.
Praise God.
And our church is good, solid, encouraged. Now, the challenge is right now is that our people, the pressure that we've been experiencing as a leadership for the last 2 months is trickling down into the congregation with the increased media attention. They're now starting to feel it in various ways. And so I feel for them in that, of course, as their shepherd. So far, we've been able as a leadership, and probably me in particular in some ways, to kind of protect them from the heat, but that heat is now being directed at the whole church. So it's a time of testing, but it's I think our church, I know our church will survive this because the gates of Hades will not prevail against the Lord's church, and we are a true body of believers. And I believe that our church will come out healthier and stronger as a result of this. And I don't think this is the biggest battle that we're going to fight in our day.
Right.
I think this is just the beginning.
Right.
And so we need to begin to flex our spiritual convictions in the face of legislation that is anti-Christ, anti-gospel, anti-God.
What why kind of pick this battle? Why pick this health emergency order battle as a pastor? Why not just, do all the social distancing and everything to kind of keep the government off your back?
Yeah, well, so bottom line is, if we comply with the health orders, we can't meet as a church. Mm-hmm. So if we can't meet together corporately, then we're not meeting. And if the reason we're not meeting is due to health orders, then the question has to be, well, who's head of the church?
Right.
Is Christ the head of the church, or is the government the head of the church?
Right.
And so fundamentally, when it comes down to it, it's about who is the head of the church. Is the church subject to Caesar with regard to its ecclesiology? Can the government dictate to the church how it must worship, the terms of worship? And we would say fundamentally not. Right. So, historically, I haven't been a hugely political guy because the political battles have largely been outside the walls of our church.
Yeah.
This is different. And we're not doing it for political reasons, but now politics are reaching into the body of Christ. It's a jurisdiction that we as a leadership have authority over, not the government.
Right.
And so with the conviction that Jesus is Lord and head of his church, and with sufficient knowledge to look at the severity of COVID-19, recognizing it's not nearly as severe as they projected it to be, and recognizing that our people aren't in jeopardy of losing their lives when they come to gather. Yes, there are risks associated with COVID-19. We're not saying you're not going to die, guaranteed, but nevertheless, it's not much more serious than the flu. So with that in play, the only reasons that we could come up with for not gathering is the fear of the consequences.
Right. Ugh.
Either Jesus is Lord or he's not.
Yeah. And so, a lot of Christians, we've had it really easy, us Western Christians, and we haven't really had to worry about engaging our faith in a way that there was consequences in our Western worlds. And now, it seems like we went 0 to 100 miles an hour this past year and what it meant to be a Christian, practicing your faith in the public square.
We're going to get back to that here in hour 2. We're coming up to the end of the first hour. Really appreciate everyone tuning in tonight to episode 98, Celebrate Truth Radio. Getting close to episode 100. It's going to be awesome. I'm looking to get a bunch of people on, I think, for that episode. And it's a milestone hitting episode 100. Seems like just yesterday started up Celebrate Truth, but we've been running Celebrate Truth on YouTube 2015. It was August of 2015 when the channel, the inception took place. And since then, almost 20 million views, over 100,000 subscribers. And I've done many documentaries, that which I have a special running right now for two of one of my, I guess, more famous documentaries, the Scientism Exposed and Scientism Exposed 2. And right now, if you order one, you get one for free. So it doesn't matter what you order, you're going to get an extra one for free. You can go to celebratetruth.org. That's celebratetruth.org. Or you can go to Amazon and you check it out, but you can see the reviews. You can either get a digital copy, you could get a, as far as the DVDs, that's where the special is. If you want an extra DVD for free, just order one and you'll get the second one for free. So we're doing a big sale right now. It's been really popular. I've been blown away at just the level of response. I mentioned it just last week on last week's show. And there's been an overwhelming demand for that, whether it's getting it out, getting it into people's hands. It's a great way sometimes where you can just kind of hand them something rather than go and look at a video. But I think it plays in nicely what we're talking about when it comes to scientism versus science. And we're seeing this. It's no different when it comes to the origins of Earth or evolution or all these things when, scientism takes this hierarchy and says, we're the authorities, the science is settled. They're doing the same thing. They're doing the same thing with COVID. They're saying, we're the scientists. The science is settled. The scientists all agree. At first, the scientists were saying, don't wear a mask. And now they're saying, no, you have to wear a mask. Now you have to wear double masks. I don't know if you've heard that. But now that's the big thing is, they're moving in different areas where you have to make sure that you're double masked. So if you're like wearing a bandana or like a scarf, it's got to be folded to have 2 layers. That's going to be the new thing. You're probably going to see that coming out here in the next few weeks while they're talking about trying to get us to wear 2 masks. So if you're wearing like a regular like N95 or something like that, it's already got the 2 layers, but they're going to be enforcing it for people that are simply just wearing a scarf or a bandana. As long as it's double folded, I hear, you'll be okay. But this is the madness that we're dealing with in our society, where the scientists have come forward and said, we're trusting the science. You know how they said that with Trump? It's Biden. He's trusting the scientist. I mean, he's going to trust the scientist. Accordingly, Trump wasn't. He wasn't. He was questioning climate change. And I've mentioned this on previous broadcasts that climate change is going to become the biggest threat to humanity. If it hasn't been before in the past, get ready for 2022, 2023, and 2024. They are going to make it they're going to blow it up to all outside proportions. You can't even imagine how big that threat is going to become. If you thought the coronavirus stuff was crazy, wait, get ready for the climate change threat that's about to hit humanity. They are going to ramp it up tenfold when the coronavirus starts fizzling out, which I think personally, by 2022, it will start kind of petering out a little bit, but that's when they're going to start enforcing this whole climate change. That's kind of my feeling on it. I could be wrong, but that's what I see taking place. I really appreciate everyone. We'll be back right after this break. Don't go anywhere. Check out celebratetruth.org to see all the specials, see all the DVDs, the book, all sorts of things are there. And we'll be right back. So don't go anywhere. We got a lot more, an hour or two. Pastor James Coates giving an interview exclusively.
Radio at freedomslips.com, and we'll be right back after this message.
Enter into a world unseen on Raven Star's Witching Hour. You will encounter eclectic topics from the realm of spirit brought into our matrix of truth. With your host, the Solaris Blue Raven. Solaris will bring you an array of unique guests covering topics from ghostly spirits to amazing anomalies, covert technology, UFOs, and shadowy global events.
And that's right here, Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, Saturdays, midnight till 2 a.m. Eastern Time. Revolution Radio, where information never sleeps.
Let the magic rise.
Hello, Karl Marx here. Look at my wonderful hair. Notice how I sweep it back.
Carl?
I call it the 360 sweep. Beard, sideburns, and the magnificent coif.
Carl!
What? What is this?
You're on the radio. They can't see you.
Oh, yeah, I get confused. Want to learn more about the Marxist agenda and other important stuff? Listen to The Ultimate Remedy with L.B. Bork, Tuesdays, 6 p.m. Eastern, right here on Revolution Radio.
This is Barbara DeLong, host of Nightlight Radio, inviting you to join me on a cosmic journey, exploring a metaphysical montage of spiritual material, covering everything from the mundane to the magical, UFOs to unicorns, and everything in between, including spiritual readings for those who seek enlightenment. Let Nightlight provide you with equal measure of light, love and laughter, insight, wisdom, and inspiration. Monday nights, 10 to 12 p.m. Eastern, right here on Studio B, Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com.
All right. Thanks for listening while we take that short break here at Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com. And now we're going to get back to your host.
Welcome back to Celebrate Truth. This is episode 98. And we got it. Testing. So yeah, we were getting into it, and it's going to be an exciting year. 2021. There's so much about to take place. And I've been saying this over and over on my broadcast. Get ready. There's just so much going down. This episode 98, Celebrate Truth Radio, we're getting into Pastor James Coate. This is my former pastor. I attended the church in, 2013, 14, 15, 16, I think. I don't know, somewhere in there, 3-4 years. I forget. My wife would be better on the dates as far as when we attend there. But we were there for quite some time, got to know Pastor James very, very well. And it's just incredible to see what's happening and how, he and GraceLife Church is the only church in my city that's taking a stand, and it's making the headlines. It truly is making the headlines, as you can see. We're going to get back to the interview, and then I'm going to go into a couple more articles, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But I'm not sure anyone that's tuning in tonight or this evening, what's happening in your city? Is there churches that you know of that are open? It might be time to, if you know this is taking place, take that stand, stand with them. That is something that I think is very important when it comes to it. Either write them a letter, email, do something just saying, hey, I'm standing in solidarity and standing in support of what you're doing, especially if they're staying true to their convictions, just like Pastor James Coates with what he's saying. So far, we've got into 25 minutes. We've got about another 40 minutes left here in this interview, but he's breaking down systematically why this is important. It's not just trying to be rebellious. It's saying, look, our civil liberties are at stake. And also, who is the head of the church? The government or Jesus? And that's the whole reality here. The church, the government is not the head of the church. They cannot mandate anything within worship or corporate type settings when it comes to the congregation. There is no precedent whatsoever for that. So again, I think it's really important taking these steps. Let's get back to, part 2 of the interview. And this is the only one that he has actually done to date. People were asking me maybe at some point, you could get him on Celebrate Truth Radio. That's possible. My wife does communicate quite a bit with his wife, and it's been years since I've actually reached out to Pastor James. Long story short, it was among the journeys when I started getting into enclosed cosmology, and there was a bit of a conflict of an interest. Now, I've always gone on record saying that Grace Life, it wasn't that we were treated unfairly or kicked out. It just was a difference of opinion. So we said, okay, fine. We moved on. We ended up going to a second church, and that's where we did get kicked out. And I have mentioned that pastor by name at the opening of day 2 of Flat Earth International Conference Canada, is when all the media was there. And apparently a bunch of the media went to get comment, and he was like, no comment. So again, there's no hard feelings with Pastor James Coates, but there was just a different understanding. It came to a point where he said, this is probably going to cause problems down the road with the board and all this. And I just said, that's fine. You know, good to know. It was sad. I mean, it was sad for my wife. It was sad for the family. We had got very, very close. It just seemed at that time it was very controversial. And so again, when you hear this, understand that I'm actually in full support of Pastor James Coates, regardless of our differences. That's the whole thing. Do not make issues salvational in the sense of saying, no, I'm just going to write everything off because that person doesn't believe in a closed cosmology, or they believe in some other, thing that's not salvational. That's my point. If you get to a point where you start cutting off people just because they don't believe in the true shape of the earth, guys, nobody even knows what that true shape is. My point is this, though. Don't take a dividing line when it comes to an issue like all of a sudden, fast forward, 2020, 2021. I mean, we're fighting for our lives here. We're fighting for our civil liberties, and we're going to get hung up on some weird secondary doctrine. No, this is the time to sit there and say, this brother is spot on. This is the time we need to stand together and say, we're in total support. We might have our differences, but we're in total support. God bless you for what you're doing, taking a stand. I mean, his family's going to suffer. Things are happening with the congregation. It is tough to come under the fire like this. And if you haven't done it, try it sometime, and you'll see exactly what it feels like. It's tough. It's a learning experience. So understand that anyone that's tuning in and understanding that we're not getting into doctrinal issues here. And quite honestly, like with the fundamental doctrines, I have absolutely no problems whatsoever when it comes to GraceLife Church. I think they're incredibly sound. But it's very important that we don't take that dividing line where we're like, well, they're doing church on Sunday. Guys, it is beyond that. If you're going to be stuck up on that and just throw something out because you know where I stand. I've been very clear on this issue. And again, I think it's very important, following the Torah and the 10 Commandments. But if you get to a point where you look at someone and you write them off and say they can't even be a brother because they're not worshiping on the right day. Look, man, I was for many, many days not even honoring the Sabbath. And again, are you going to write off all my years of ministry as saying, well, I was just deceived? No. God was working with me, and in that time, I came to it at that right time. Maybe in the future, people will come to certain things, but don't start to elevate it to a point where you're like, nah, I'm not even going to bother with them because they don't get the truth. The truth. Everyone talks about the truth, like we all have the truth. Guys, we're progressing over in our understanding. And if you actually look back 10 years, if you've been a Christian for over 20 years, if you look back, I'm sure there's certain things that have changed. My eschatology changed. I used to believe in pre-trib. That's right. I used to believe that we were taken up in the rapture before the tribulation. I don't believe that anymore. But at that point, if you came to me, I would have defended it. I would have debated it. And the fact of the matter was that we do have the secondary doctrines that we might change over time. Understand the fundamentals. This is solid. This is a brother in Christ. This is a church that you want to support, especially when it comes to all the stuff that's going on in our world. And we're going to get hung up. Guys, don't get hung up. This is the time where you call someone up and you say, we stand with you. We're praying with you. This is the fight of our lives, guys. This is like seriously 2030, Agenda 2030, the Great Reset. This is serious business we're dealing with. It's a spiritual war. We know that. So if you see churches in your area that are taking a stand and they're good and godly and saying, we need to obey God, we need to do this, stand with them. Stand with them.
Going to church. And so we haven't really been exercising, I think, some of these kind of courageous Christian muscles, in all this. And so we've been apathetic, and there's, our legs are weak, our arms are weak, our shield of faith is weak, our helmet of, salvation is weak. What is that? I remember when I got arrested, I was, it took a certain amount of, kind of courageous muscles. It was nothing like what Rosa Parks, I think, did. Her courage was far greater than mine. But I remember basically tapping into these muscles that I've never had to work as a Christian in my life, hardly at all. How have you kind of been processing and growing in courage and faith in all this as you've put your church on the line?
Yeah, I just think you're looking at the worst case scenarios, and you stare down the barrel of the worst case scenario, and you have to digest that, and that takes time. And if you've got the conviction that what you're doing is right, and you're just staring down the barrel of consequences, then you can't tap out because your conviction won't let you. And so all you can do is bear up under the fear and the weight of the potential consequences, and God carries you through that, and you get to the place in wrestling with him where you're willing to just give it up, kiss it goodbye. And obviously at this point in time, I guess you would think that one of the worst case scenarios would be jail time.
Right.
And so you just gotta resolve that, you know, you're gonna obey Christ.
Right.
And if it results in spending time in jail, as desirable as that would be,
right.
You got to do what's right in the sight of the Lord.
Right. It's amazing that we're talking about this in this moment. You know, it's amazing that we're talking about jail time for literally going to church. Has there been like any blowback from the citizens kind of in Alberta? Kind of like, why is our health department doing this? Is there kind of anybody been worked up about this?
Yeah, I would say so Alberta in Canada is like the most conservative province.
Right.
We would be like the closest to the Americans in Canada.
Right.
And that's certainly changing. But so I would say in our province, there's definitely, some appetite for civil disobedience at this juncture.
Right.
So yeah, I mean, we were kind of waiting to see what was going to happen last Sunday, and we had 4 news outlets that were outside our service prior to the beginning of our service. They basically eavesdrop on our services, and they always seem to take statements from our announcements and call it my sermon. So on Sunday, I'm going to have to clarify for the media, this is just the announcements.
Yeah.
The sermon will take about 30 minutes from now. It's about an hour long or so. But as soon as we knew they were there, we posted a public statement. And with that statement, we recognize that as we address the public of Alberta, they don't care about the theology. They're not concerned about the theological reasons why we're doing what we're doing. They're predominantly why we're doing what we're doing. This is about Christ and obedience to him.
Right.
But we thought, you know what, we got to address the public on this issue of loving our neighbor.
Right.
Because the narrative that's painted is that we're so selfish. What a selfish bunch of people who have to go and worship their God.
Right.
and do so in the middle of this pandemic while we all sacrifice our lives by isolating and next thing you know, they're calling you're a murderer for doing that. And so we just thought, we got to address this in language they're going to understand and appreciate. It's tethered to theology because to love your neighbor as yourself is intensely theological,
right?
And that shapes why we do what we do. But yeah, I mean, since that public statement, not only is the media clearly, I would say, disrupted as they try and control the narrative, knowing that statement's actually having an impact. Right. We do have folks that are reaching out and showing support. So there are supporters out there for sure.
Wow. Yeah. Is it? What city are you guys located in Alberta?
So we are just a stone's throw outside of Edmonton.
Okay. And
so there's 2 main cities in Alberta, Calgary and Edmonton. Right. Calgary is the southern city. Edmonton is the northern city.
Right.
And we're like 5 minutes from Edmonton.
Okay. And did you guys get a liberal PM this last time? Or is
no, conservative.
And how?
Yeah, in fact,
how's he reacting on this? Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, well, so in the summertime, when he declared the end of the first public health emergency, he referred to COVID-19, I think 6 times as influenza. So he deliberately called it influenza. Mm-hmm. And obviously the left-wing media and politicians pushed back on that hugely. How could you call it influenza? And he did that on purpose because he was opening things up, and it was politically expedient to do so, I guess, and that's why he did it at that time. But his tune has definitely changed. Right. He's not singing off the same song sheet, right. And you know what? Like, I hate to say it, I think he's a politician who is, he is under a lot of pressure, and he's playing politics, and he's in a tough spot. But I think when you have the opportunity that he has in our province, even if it's to the detriment of your career, you stand and take the right stance for the people that you govern.
Right. What do you think? So moving forward, are you guys going to have church on Sunday?
Yeah.
And you're gonna preach a sermon, full church service, everything?
That's correct. Yeah.
Praise God, man. What has been the conversations with your elders in your church this week? Is everyone really encouraged? Everyone's, of course, knows that looks like more persecution will probably come. I mean, what has been the conversations this week?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think we've just been trying to, understand and set the expectation for what this weekend might look like and what the fallout of this weekend could be. Our guys are certainly resolved. I think, of course, as things heat up, the weight that I've been feeling trickles down a little bit further into them, and they begin to feel it a little more burden than they've been feeling. But we've got men that are men of conviction. We want to honor Christ. We want to do what's right in His sight, and so we're the guys are supportive.
What would be your, if the PM came to your church service, what would be your message to the government, to the PM, during all this?
Well, that's a good question, because with this weekend the way it's gone, like normally, so today's Thursday, normally I'd be well on my way in my sermon. I had a funeral that I had to do today, and so this has just been a different week. I'm wrestling with, am I going to finish the end of John 10, or am I going to do something off the map a little bit? And I've been thinking about circling back to Romans 13, and possibly preaching Romans 13 with a view towards speaking to the government about what its role and function is, and calling it to act as it's supposed to act. And realistically, that could result in a call to repentance.
Yeah. One of the things that I've been thinking through in all this is, from my arrest, they arrested good people, good citizens doing good things. And, to your point earlier, Romans 13 is like the government's job is not to harass good people. The government's job is to go after evildoers. And we've over the years, we've allowed this notion to flip. We have abortion in our country. Over 60 million babies have died since 1973. We flipped the definition of what evil means upside down. And now we're going after good people. We're going after good people with the government, and not evildoers like we should be. And it's just we've had a lack of discipleship in the church, teaching its congregation and how to be thinking about how we engage our public sphere, and how we go about thinking the spheres that John MacArthur talked about. Well, he got that from Abraham Kuyper. That's a sphere, the sphere of sovereignty. That whole concept or the language came from Abraham Kuyper. It was a Dutch theologian and was the president or PM or whatever of oh my goodness, Holland. Wow, thanks Bill. And God gave us three governments. God gave us the church government, God gave us the family government, and God gave us the civil government. And those three governments are not absolute. I can't believe that my governor in the state of Idaho literally believes that he has the authority to shut down businesses, because that's what he did. My mayor in my town literally believes he had the authority to shut down businesses. What government, what world have we grown up into where our government thinks they have the authority to tell you to stop making money, to stop providing for your family, and to stop worshiping and ministering to your congregation? Like it's we have discipled our people into just accepting that this is acceptable, that the government has some sort of, basically they're acknowledging that they have some sort of unlimited power. right? That's when they declare this health emergency order, they are declaring that they can be in a moment where they can have unlimited power and tell you what to do and what to wear. Your government tells you what face mask you can wear. Well, if they tell you what face mask you can wear, they can tell you what color it needs to be. And if they tell you what color it needs to be, then they can tell you, to wear a condom, because that's a health hazard waiting to happen with a bunch of Christians having babies. Or they can tell you the vaccine. Or they can tell a bunch of people, don't go shop over in this Jewish restaurant over here. Don't go eat over there. Like, the connection between what the government is telling you to do with the face mask and the reality of what that could mean 10 years down the road, 20 years down the road, is incredible. And so I think it's really important that Christians push back and find ways to push back now. And it's gonna be painful. It's gonna put you through some hardship for sure. But God is in heaven and we're on earth. God's in control. He knows what he's doing, and he's growing up the church. Let me ask you this question. How many churches in Canada are behind you in what you guys are doing?
That's a good question. And I don't know if I could say for sure. Obviously, you guys have talked to Jacob. Jacob's in Ontario, and he's a precious brother. I hear from churches in BC, and they're west of us. So, they're open. There's some churches in Alberta that are open. But yeah, there's not nearly as many as there could be. Mm-hmm. We've got look, in Alberta, we have a number of solid churches that are like-minded churches that we would consider ourselves brothers and would, in fellowship with. And they're just approaching things differently. And I wish it wasn't the case. But even if each individual pastor leading those churches had the conviction to be open, they'd still have to have a unified leadership, and they'd have to have a congregation that was willing to go. And it's so difficult to have the ingredients you need to be able to take the stand that's required.
Right. So it sounds like in Alberta, I mean, there's not much support from other churches in your province.
Yeah, I mean, not nearly as many as there should be, for sure. I mean, there was a solid church in Calgary that, a solid guy, Tim Stevens, he's been trying to be open, but it's just, it hasn't worked out for him. He's got the conviction, but he's just trying to shepherd his flock, and he's got to care for the flock that the Lord's entrusted to him. Yeah. We get emails and different things like that. And then we have the Diocese of Edmonton that, does a public statement about us and calls us out for not caring for the health of Albertans. And so we get negative, we get some positive, and it just.
Man, praise God. God has made you for this moment, and your family and your wife and your kids. That was one of the things that I noticed in all this also with my family, was how supportive my wife was when I got arrested, and how I'll never forget this moment. But coming home that night after being released, I was in the county jail for a couple hours. But coming home that night, my kids couldn't go to sleep. They wanted to see me, so they, their bedtime's at 8:30. And it was 10 o'clock, I think, when I got home, and they came running downstairs and just gave me a big hug, and super cheerful and super happy. And it made me realize just how important it is for your wife and kids to be on the same page and to be spiritually on the same page. And to create, because imagine you going through this and you're getting arrested and you're living your convictions and doing it right, but your wife is not quite there, and how hard that would be.
It would almost be impossible.
Yeah.
Like I would say, my wife is incredibly solid, and so if there's any coddling going on, at times she's coddling me. Maybe now as things are heating up, I'm doing a little more coddling of her.
Yeah.
But she's been super supportive. She's just she just likes to say she's glad she didn't marry a coward. And
amen.
I'm not trying to be a hero, but I wanna honor Christ.
Well, I've drawn this connection before, but the same courage that it took you to preach last Sunday and to get arrested is the same courage that it took Rosa Parks to sit in the front of the bus. Now, and the courage that it took her, I think, was far greater than the courage that you needed to take, even though I think your courage is significant. I'm not trying to minimize any of that.
No.
But, she had, entrenched laws for decades against her. These laws that have popped up in Canada have been for the last 6 months. So, it's like you're rightly going against the grain. You're rightly standing up like you should. But this is why it bothers me so much that the cops arrested me and arrested you, is because basically they're the same kind of cops that would arrest Rosa Parks. All the same reasoning applies to those cops who arrested Rosa Parks to how the cops are reasoning with you right now in Canada. You're just following the laws. We're just trying to keep the peace in our community. We don't want to cause any problems, and we're just we're just obeying our chief or obeying our health services department or obeying our PM. And it's like, well, if you guys had Jim Crow laws in Alberta, you guys would be, based on those reasoning, based on the argumentation you're giving me, you would be doing the same thing with Rosa Parks. And this is why we need to be thinking Christians and how we process these things. And this is why this moment's so important. I asked the question earlier, why pick on the COVID restrictions? Why, make anything out of these COVID restrictions? Why not just try to appease, go through this time, go through this year, whatever, 6 months, 8 months, whatever it is, and not cause any problems? Well, it's because so much at stake in all this. And we don't understand. And what's at stake is fundamentally the truth of God's world and his word in our lives and what it means to this world. If cops are going to arrest you for preaching the word, worshiping, loving your congregation, being a good shepherd, how much more cops going to arrest, members of your congregation for pushing back down the road? Or how much more are the cops just going to, as they ratchet up the compliance because they're getting pressure from, the health services, all the reasoning that the cops are using right now and the Health and Human Services, a lot of the Jim Crow laws were health codes. You can't drink out of this fountain because you aren't as we think you're not as healthy, or we don't want you to infect our fountains. Seriously, it was health code laws, Jim Crow health code laws, and here we are. What did it take for Nazi Germany to get to where they were at? How come all of a sudden Nazi Germany got to a place where the neighbors knowingly watched their Jewish neighbors get carried off to concentration camps? They knew where they were going. They did nothing about it, and they said nothing. Well, that's because 10, 20, 30 years before, they were making all these compromises, not knowing all these compromises that they were making. And then all of a sudden, 30 years later, you wind up in a place that you never could have imagined you would have been there 30 years earlier. But because the church is compromised, because our citizens are compromised, we are now in this moment where pushing back, even to worship, you're getting arrested. And it's because we basically become a Jim Crow nation. We've basically become a people, a citizenry full of people who would willingly adopt Jim Crow laws. And we're just adopting a different set of Jim Crow laws. That's all we're doing. But there's absolute truth reigning over us, guiding us in this process. That's why I think what you're doing is so important, not just for not for just Alberta, but for the health of Canada. Is because the truth of God's word fundamentally comes down and lands even in these moments, this arbitrary application of health codes in Canada. Kind of rattled on a little bit, but I think it's really important that the church understands this, and that sees the connection between a government that can tell you to wear a mask is a government that can tell black people to sit on the back of the bus. That's
fair.
That's wicked. Man, anything else? I'll let you go here, but anything else? How can people be supporting you? How can people be praying? People be reaching out and helping you, and going on with your church?
Yeah, I would just say, I think the public statement that we made. If people believe that's a good public statement, recognizing that's not the primary reason why we're where we are, but it addresses the whole man, then I would say share that. Obviously, we can use the prayers of God's people without a shadow of a doubt. Visibility to sermons that are helpful on the issue to try and get people to see this the way they need to be seeing it. I mean, the church needs to be cared for, ministered to. It needs the means of grace. All the means of grace are most operative in the corporate gathering. Christians have been without the means of grace for months and months.
Yeah.
The Church of Christ is languishing. I realize there's a sifting that's taking place at this point in time between the true and the false.
Yeah.
But we need the Church of Christ to come together and come under the preaching of God's word. I mean, I'll say this, look, this so-called pandemic has certainly stifled a lot of false teaching and a lot of bad worship. So, in that sense, I can see how,
Amen.
how God is not, nearly as frustrated with the awful worship that takes place. The true church and herald the gospel and stand for the lordship and headship of Christ over his church and gather and worship with one voice, one mind,
right,
in a gathering where the one another's are taking place and masks aren't inhibiting the fellowship of the brethren, and the church is being built up to all maturity.
Well, I know, I reached out to Pastor Rayom and really appreciate what they're doing over there. I really appreciate the stance you're taking in Alberta and with your church, and it sounds like you've been shepherding well. And we know that we don't fear those who can hurt our bodies. We fear the God of heaven and earth. And we know when everyone's going to be called to account, you'll be one of those faithful shepherds there, man. Good work, brother. We're praying. Whatever happens, this is the great thing. Whatever happens next week, God is in heaven, and you're, one of the stories I've been drawing strength off of in all this is Pastor Wang Yi in China. He's got a 9-year prison sentence for preaching the gospel in China. The small persecutions that we're going to go through doing what's faithful here in the U.S. and Canada is very small in comparison to Pastor Wang Yi faithfully going to prison in China. And of course, ultimately, Jesus dying on the cross for our sins. That's the greatest persecution that's ever happened on this planet. And so Jesus has already led your way, brother. He's already led your way for your church. He's led your way for you. He's led your way for your elders. And no matter what happens, they can't destroy you. So receive that as encouragement, brother. You got me tearing up over here a little bit.
It is, man.
We're praying for you, and stay on the line here when we get off, because I want to talk to you for a second longer. But we appreciate you, brother. We're praying for you. Everyone, thanks for tuning in. Please be in prayer for James and his church.
Yeah, definitely keep in prayer for Grace Life. That's gracelife.ca. You can find it on the web. You'll see the public statement posted there. Reach out to them, send them support. Say you heard about them on Celebrate Truth Radio. Like I mentioned before, it is my previous church. I got to know James very, very well. We had many, many in-depth conversations over the years. And definitely stand with him. And it would be great if you would, keep the church and him and his family in prayer. It has just begun, guys. I mean, this is just starting. I mean, even though they've gone to court, he's been fined. He's even been somewhat, I guess officially arrested, although they just, didn't handcuff him and they instantly released him based on the conditions, which he's not going to abide by. So again, the conditions that were set forth, he's not going to. It's business, or I should say church as usual tomorrow. It's Saturday, February the 13th, 2021, and they will be church as usual tomorrow, February 14th. It could be a big day. It could be a very big day in Canada. This would be the first, I believe, arrest in all of the country. So I would imagine that, and maybe this is, all God's plan, that it is supposed to go to that direction where all of a sudden the conversation begins. People start seeing, wait a minute, have they gone too far? They've now arrested someone for meeting in church, a pastor that's faithfully preaching, continuing on what he is commanded to do, and now he's arrested. I'm not saying he's going to be arrested. It might drag out for a lot longer, but even his own lawyer, I believe, has given him counsel that it is a very real possibility. Now, I think they said that he could do up to 1 year. So it's not like a pastor in China that is serving 9 years. Can you imagine, for preaching the gospel, 9 years in prison? 9 years for preaching the gospel. Unbelievable. So, I mean, you say, well, at least we're not there, but we could get there. We could get there. So it's time right now to stand. If you knew what was happening in Germany and you could kind of see those signs, you might have taken a stronger stance. But again, you didn't. You didn't have kind of history to look at the way we do now. And we can kind of see what's creeping in, especially in America. It is frightening what they are talking about as far as re-education camps, cleansing the movement, the hatred, the pure, absolute hatred towards anyone that would even speak up, the censorship on social media. I mean, this very video could be banned. It could be the one video that all of a sudden I cease to exist and Celebrate Truth on YouTube. That's why you got to make sure every Saturday I'm on freedomslips.com or Revolution Radio. Revolution.radio is the website to go to, and it's listener supported. They're censorship free. Consider supporting them. You can see all the information on revolution.radio. You can see Patreon in different ways. And it is something that's important because the big sites, Google, Twitter, Facebook, all this stuff. I mean, we saw such horrifying things take place. Never in a million years would you ever think they would ban the sitting president of the United States. And yet they did. Remember when Alex Jones got banned and everyone was like, oh, well, it's just Alex. It's Alex Jones. And even Alex was saying, guys, if they come for me, I'm the start. They will come for other serious players. And there is no more serious person than the sitting president of the United States. And yet all together, it's like they all got together in a meeting and said, let's do it. Let's pull the trigger. And one by one, instantly that day, taken down. I don't know if people really grasp how incredible that is to think. To silence literally the president of the United States, the massive tech giants moved in and just gone, wiped out completely. Millions and millions and millions of people that had chosen to say, I want to hear that information. Good or bad, even if you think he was crazy, good, let's hear him be crazy. Make up your own opinions based on what he's saying. But yet, nope, he's dangerous. We have to protect everyone. It's like everyone's gone in this mode now where they're reducing and limiting people's civil liberties based on your protection. Again, remember the whole safety, right? And again, that is the danger that we're in right now, where you will lose so many of your personal freedoms in the big banner of safety. We're keeping you safe. We're keeping you safe. And when you start looking up the numbers, again, this is going to be written about. This is not just going to pass us by. You're going to see it over and over and over again. People are going to compare the numbers and say, what really took place in 2020, 2021? Here are the numbers. What in the world were they thinking? And now, with America, and it's big, it's a big deal. that the left or the Democrats have taken all three branches of the government. It's a huge deal because you're not dealing with just right, left, Republican, Democrat. You're dealing with literally Marxist, communist, capitalist, whatever you want to call it. When it comes to, communist, communism, it is there. It is openly. They're bragging about it. And their tactics and what they are doing are in line and are in step exactly what takes place with a tyrannical government. We've always warned about, we got to worry about tyrannical governments. We do. We really do. When you start seeing them enforcing things, as far as we knew about the mainstream media, yeah, okay. But all of a sudden, the tech giants have moved in. And the tech giants, don't make no mistake, they are way more powerful than any of the networks, okay? People think the networks are, that's where most people get their information. No, I'm sorry. It is more crucial when it comes to social media. These tech giants have the public square. They literally can limit you where you have no more voice. It is gone. That is it. It is done. And one by one, they are coming they're coming against everyone. Now, we'll see what happens with this acquittal. I think they're going to have a hissy fit. They're going to have a little tantrum. They're going to flip out because, oh my goodness, they didn't get to do what they wanted to do. So the question is, what are they going to do? And while Trump is remaining pretty quiet through this whole thing, where do you think they're going to set their sights on? That's right. The worst threat in humanity in 100 years, the domestic terrorist. And who are those domestic terrorists? That's right. Conservatives, Christians, Republicans, Trump supporters. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. But isn't it interesting how they've lumped? I find this really intriguing, tell you the truth, okay? Everyone's all like, the Republicans, Democrats, it's all an illusion. Interesting, because now they have basically lumped pretty much Republicans with conspiracy theorists. Things are changing. Whatever you want to say, things are changing. Something really definitely took place that's different. I've said about it multiple times on my channel. Think what you want, but again, history will prove it to be true when you see the absolute hatred that will come towards Trump and his family years after he's already done and gone and out. Now, some people might be thinking he's coming back and he's somehow going to overturn things in March. It's wishful thinking. It's not just wishful thinking. It's dangerous and it's delusional. Don't think for a minute that all of a sudden next month something radical is just going to take place and everyone's going to get arrested. It's fantasy land. It just truly is. Unfortunately, you maybe have bought into things so on a deep level that you're just wanting things to change. And again, I don't blame you. I mean, it is dire when you start looking at the situation. But remember that God is truly in control and they can only do so much as what he permits. So in all of this that's taking place, remember, it's always for the benefit for those that love him, love God. And if you truly do love God with all your heart, right? With all your body, your might, your soul, your strength, again, and you love your neighbor, man, truly. And I'm saying this in this time that we really, truly love people. Stop debating. What are we debating for? I mean, our civil liberties, we're moving into a totalitarian type of, again, you're seeing America, United States. I was talking to someone in Canada. I mean, we're talking about this in Canada where we're scratching our heads and saying, did you ever think in a million years that America would be taken over that quickly? Guys, it has been taken over. I'm not saying it's going to be taken over forever, but right now, as it stands, America has been taken over. By who? Not a bunch of Democrats. By Marxist, communist, crazy, agenda, UN 30. We're talking the craziest, most radical. I wish it was taken over by just some moderate Democrats. I mean, it wouldn't be that big a deal. But you're dealing with the horrifying nature of what happened when we saw that Obama got in. If you think that's horrifying, get ready for the run that we're about to be in. These guys are going crazy. 52 executive orders Biden has done in the first month. Something like that. Don't quote me on it, but it's very close. I know it's over 50. Just for perspective, if you take the last 5 presidents combined in the first month, I think it is like double, or it is astronomically higher than all presidents combined in the last 4 or 5 presidents. It is an enormous amount. And Biden has the audacity to sit there and complain about Trump doing an executive order here and there and saying, that's what dictators do, he says. And you can find the quotes on YouTube. That's what dictators do, executive orders. And yet Biden's done 52. Now ask yourself, why? Why would he say a state like that? Because Biden is not in control. Everyone should know this, right? Everyone knows that they're pretty much prepping for Kamala Harris to become the first female U.S. president. That's their plan all along. I think it's very, very evident. And if that's not even the case, we all know that Biden can only go for so long. And it's very easy just to be like, whether it's a medical leave, whether he has to step down, cognitive, whatever they want, they're set up in such a way. But almost they need Biden right now. And you're wondering, why would they need Biden right now? Because Biden is like, he's very soothing in the sense that for the average person that just went through this Trump thing, through the media making him look like an absolute lunatic and like, a crazy Hitler, all of a sudden Biden comes in and he's this kind of soft, gentle, kind of that grandfather-y type. And it just kind of is, okay, maybe we're going to get to normal here, just someone normal and stuff. But over time, I think people and even moderate Democrats are going to start going, oh dear, what the heck have we done? And it wasn't that they voted for Biden, because quite honestly, no one really cared about Biden. They would do interviews to people that were on the left and saying, hey, talk to us about Biden. No one cared. No one even knew anything about him. No one talked about his policies. They were just like orange mad and bad, Biden good. That was it. That was the only reason, that you saw a lot of people that were basically supporting Biden, because they didn't like Trump. It wasn't like Biden is so great, because no one actually thinks that. I mean, you saw his rallies and he had 8 people. Where Trump had these sellout things all the time. And I'm not making this political, right, left, Republican, Democrat. I'm just telling you right now, there is an agenda. You get on board. And if you don't get on board, you are going to be silenced. You're going to be censored. You're going to be destroyed. And this is what we're seeing. What was the actress's name? That was a big headline with The Mandalorian. I think that was Disney. I haven't seen it. I'm sure a lot of you that are listening have seen the show. But apparently, she put up some posts. And she was making an observation based on what was taking place, where they were saying that the Nazis didn't need to do much. The neighbors were doing it for them already. They had prepped people to hate these people so much. Well, and she was saying, look, kind of what's going on right now. They're building up this hate to really hate these science deniers, to hate these conspiracy theories, these people that are trying to keep us, in danger. We're seeing the same thing. And I've been warning about this for years. Even before this came about, I was saying that science denial is going to become very, very serious. Not mocked, not laughed at. It is like a terrorist. They were equating it with terrorism. I had done videos, and there's videos on my channel that are dating back 3 and 4 years ago, where you saw this link, where they were saying these people are dangerous. Anyone that's denying science equals terrorism. And it wouldn't surprise me if something is done in the future where they do link it with someone that is really, anti-science or something like this, where they're like, see, this is what happens. There's danger. And now they're using this whole thing when it comes to COVID as basically saying, look, anyone that's denying this, they're a danger to society. But when you see all these things happening, you got to ask yourself the question, what exactly are they moving us towards? What are they moving us towards? Have you ever stopped to think about it? Everyone has these ideas. And understand that anytime they're moving you towards something, I personally believe it's like the frog in the pot analogy. It's going to be a slow type of thing. And even though it's sped up, there's no doubt about it, I still believe that it's way down the line. A lot of people say, oh no, like the way they're going, we're going to be rounded up in like 2 years' time, or we're going to all be, forced to take vaccines in like a year. And guys, I don't think that's the way it works. I think that will backfire. And I think they kind of know that. If they go too strong, the most moderate person is going to say, yeah, no thanks. Like, in the minute you force something, like you make it legally, something that's a requirement, it usually does repulse people and it repels. It doesn't really do what you want to do. So we'll see how it plays out. But I do have a feeling that they already have their next thing in place, which is going to be climate change. You start doing any amount of research, you're going to find out that this is the glue that is going to hold the whole thing together. It's not going to be some sort of pandemic. It's going to be climate change. They're moving with the corporations. Going back to the media giants, all the tech giants are on board. Now they're moving to the big corporations. And when the corporations start to actually enforce this, then it will trickle down. The government doesn't have to do anything. This is what's really incredible to think about. Everyone talks about the Constitution, and in a way, they don't have to actually violate the Constitution, because if the government does something, yes, they might be violate the Constitution. But if private businesses do something that's not illegal, but again, it's not constitutionally wrong, guess what, guys? They've circumnavigated. They've gone around it. This is what we're dealing with. So what they're doing, and I know that they're going to keep eroding the Constitution, fighting that, but they don't need to do it so much, because they are going to use the tech giants, which are private businesses. And again, we've been preaching this for a long time. Private businesses should be able to operate any way they want. We complain on one end about that baker that's forced to do something like bake a certain cake that's against their religious convictions. And yet now they're saying businesses should be able to do whatever they want. Well, what is it, government? If it is, then they shouldn't have to bake that cake, right? But again, they're using this equality and equity. And you're going to see the new words that are really going to be hitting hard. It's not going to be equality. It's going to be equity. Learn the difference between the two, because it's very intriguing how they're bringing equity in. There's equity laws that are taking place, and all these sort of things are coming down. So I believe that the corporations, the tech giants, all these, they're like the arm. They're the muscle of the government, and the government doesn't have to do anything. So people are like, well, they're going to make me, take a vaccine. I don't think the government is going to make that a law at all. I think the businesses are going to. Businesses are going to say you need to. And then what can you do? You can just resist or whatever, right? But it will be businesses that will enforce this, just like they're enforcing speech right now. And they are absolutely gaslighting us all. There's no doubt about it. Glacier 5, I don't know if it's Gal 513 in YouTube, he mentioned that. And yeah, it's absolutely right. They just truly are. And they're moving us towards that direction where we all have to be vigilant on the fact of saying, wait a minute, what is truly happening, and are we getting prepared for it? This is the time that we need to kind of like talk to people, not so much about, oh, darn masks or, vaccines. These are important, but we need to say the bigger picture here and say, look, civil liberties, our whole existence is at stake in the sense that they want to transform and eradicate. And while I say this what's happening in the States, there's already multiple countries that are on board. I've always said this for years and years and years. The only way that the New World Order can actually accomplish their plans fully, worldwide, is America needs to fall. America needs to be taken over completely, 100%. Now, it's still going to take a while. America's been taken over, yes, but in order to saturate and to actually completely build it up in the sense that newer generations are being taught as fact, and we're seeing this already with the indoctrination of children, sure, but getting into these mandates for, I guess, Agenda 2030 or that type of philosophy, to move towards that, you've got to take it down where all of a sudden you've got an authority figure that doesn't override, but it's like an oversight of America. We're already seeing that now with Biden. We're seeing this now with them bringing in these things, and they're using, race equality. They're using the whole gender thing. They're using climate change. They're using critical race theory, all these type of things. And you're kind of like, wait a minute, what does this all have to do, the Great Reset, with we've got to build back better? Well, their whole idea is restructuring everything and changing everything because, after all, they want all the children to know that everything that they were taught about America is wrong. And, the truth of America is evil. The truth of America is just horrifying. It's racist. It's awful. There's nothing good about it. Therefore, we need to make it good. That's what we're seeing. We're seeing this happen continually. But also, it's been a big test to see exactly compliance. How far can we push this, especially under the medical guys, under scientism? And it was scientism that came forward with their white lab coats, whatever, and said, doctor this, doctor that, doctor this. The scientists agree. The science is settled. This is what we need to do. It's always about the science. Scientism Exposed, the documentary that I was explaining there just before the top of the hour, on the first hour, was really about that. Guys, I had other areas. I mean, if I could do Scientism Exposed 3, which I'm not doing, but if I was doing it, I would touch on this whole other issue. But I do touch on the climate change. I do touch on, the science of this world is nothing different than scientism. Therefore, all the branches of scientism will say the same thing. They will rise up as authority. They will rise up to dictate over us, because what's different of the scientists dictating what children learn in school? They're like, Bill Nye, you can believe whatever you want, but don't be teaching that in science class. Don't be teaching that empirical stuff, empirical evidence. Yeah, we don't believe in that empirical thing. We just believe in theories, the theory of gravity, the theory of evolution, the theory. What happened to real science? So again, all these branches, right? Evolution, you get into the entire thing, the creation. You get into climate change. You get into viruses and biology and all that. Again, scientists, right? Doctors, all this kind of stuff. They're bringing them all in. And then, heaven forbid, some doctors come forward or some scientists come forward and say, actually, guys, we got an issue here. The science is not settled. And quite honestly, we've done some data analysis, and actually, empirically, it's not supporting what you're saying. Shut up, get off, remove them, take off their, accounts. Before it was almost like we remove you from journals, we excommunicate you. Now we don't just silence you, we destroy you. We destroy your livelihood, sure, but now we make it so you can never talk again. Once you're gone off these platforms, it's very, very hard to get an audience. It just is. It's going to get harder and harder. That's why you're listening right now. Understand that it's going to be you. It's going to be you that the onus is going to be up to all of us, I should say, not just people that are at platforms and have audiences. It's going to be up to each individual to start one by one talking to people seriously and let that kind of ripple, let that domino down the road. Because honestly, the platforms over time are going to disappear. If you're going against the grain, if you're not basically towing the line, if you're not speaking exactly what they want you to speak, one by one, we're all going to disappear. And it was Alex Jones first, and I'm not going to get into this tonight, but I was saying, I don't care what you think about Alex Jones. Say whatever you want, but that is bad news. The fact that Alex Jones got banned off all the social media platforms, boom, 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 boom. I go, guys, whatever you have to say about Alex Jones, what you just witnessed was horrifyingly bad. You should support the fact that he had the right to be on that platform, even if you thought he was a shill, even if you thought he was working for the New World Order, even if you thought all these things, he was Bill Hicks. I don't care what you think. The fact was, what happened to him was horrifyingly bad, and no one paid attention. And the mainstream would just look at, well, he was a cuckoo, crazy guy. I don't have to worry about it. You don't have to worry about it. They're coming for sitting presidents of the United States. If you don't think they have power to come after every one of us, they do. They absolutely have power to come against every one of us. That's why it's important that we need to communicate. We need to talk to people. It is all about communication. Now, if you think you only have like a year left, you're like, oh, we're in such a rush. If you believe we have multiple generations left and it's up to the next generation, start empowering the children. Like start talking, making sure that there's good stuff moving forward, because this world is going to get crazier and crazier, and it's up to us to start communicating that message in love and in truth. But we need to do it. We need to do it, because there will come a time when you won't be able to hear my voice anymore. There just will come a time. Maybe it'll be a while. I mean, they're already moving towards, the big, alternative media channels when it comes to people that were, heaven forbid, supporting, Trump's stance on certain things. Stephen Crowder, I think, Glenn Beck, I think Ben Shapiro. There's a lot of those levels that are kind of, Daily Wire stuff that are kind of not mainstream, but they're off and they've had their voice. Guys, whatever you think of them, understand that you want to fight for the right to remain on those platforms, because one by one, they start picking those guys off. They're just going to move down the chain, So, I mean, it'll be a while. I don't have that huge of audience. These guys have, millions of people. That's why they're going to be the target next. But one by one, they're going to start moving towards everyone. And quite honestly, that's the whole thing. Maybe there'll come a time when we're secretly meeting and we're talking, and who knows? We're living in a Twilight Zone episode right now, so anything can happen. I mean, it got crazy in many countries like China. I mean, it was illegal for you to even talk about the Bible. Guys, Celebrate Truth Radio. Appreciate your time. Thanks so much for tuning in. God bless. We'll talk to you soon.